So I would assume at some point or another, everyone here has tripped over a piece of furniture that you've always known was there but just forgot about. Well, I used to trip over a lot as a kid too. Still do. But my mum used to move the furniture around quite a lot when I was about 3 or 4 to prepare me for primary school, where she knew that kids would leave things everywhere. Chairs out, bags all over the walkways, and really just be kids. I'd come home from preschool to find that, yep, she's knee-deep in the furniture again, and nothing was where it used to be. Now, I've since taken this as a life lesson that I would have to overcome many more obstacles in my life, and not purely the physical ones. I have always been taught to be independently minded enough to know that Mum won't always be there, and that I will have to do things for myself, from little things like navigating unfamiliar areas, furniture included, to working out how much money I have in my wallet at any given time. And what I want to show you all today is how we all can benefit from learning to overcome obstacles by pushing ourselves, being independent, fighting for what is right, and not letting others place limitations on us through some of the lessons that I've learnt about independence. I encountered my first major life obstacle when I was in primary school, where, along with the more than occasional tripping over bags, I had to fight for my right to compete and represent my school in the cross-country at zone level. Now, I made the standard qualification time, but was told that I would not be allowed to run due to my visual impairment. Is there anyone here who's ever heard of or used the phrase, "You've got 2 feet and a heartbeat, now go do it"? Usually said to children who won't go do their chores. At least that's what my household used it for. Speaking of my household, our version from that point onward was, "You might be blind, son, but your legs aren't painted on." So at 10 years old, I had to advocate for myself so that I could represent my school in something that I had already proven I could do by making the qualifications. But the biggest life obstacle that I have had to face so far was determining between the different denominations of banknotes. And it all started in Christmas of 2012 when my relatives gave me some money as a gift in the form of banknotes, as often happens. But I had to keep asking my parents how generous, or for that matter, we're talking about my family here, how cheap they had been. Because there was no way that I could tell the difference between the values myself. So after Christmas, I asked Mum why our banknotes had no way for the visually impaired to determine which banknote they were holding. And since we primarily use our hands and ears as our eyes, the logical conclusion was to have a tactile difference in the note. For those who don't know, a tactile difference is a difference in the way the note feels. Imagine if we'd gone with the other sense, we'd have talking banknotes. You'd open up your wallet and they'd all scream at you at once, "Hey, you broke!" So we did some research and found that many countries have different kinds of tactile features, but Australia didn't, even though it was a definite possibility. We also found that the Reserve Bank of Australia, the RBA, had plans to update our national currency. Sadly, though, when we contacted them, they had no interest in implementing a tactile feature during this planned upgrade. Now, I was pretty disappointed, to say the least, and I wanted to do something about it. So, at the age of 12, I set off on what became a 3-year journey to make a change. Sounds like the start to The Hobbit when I put it that way. First, we tried online options, starting a petition on change.org and sending the link out over social media. During the course of the campaign, we received more than 57,000 signatures from people all around the world, and I would just like to take a couple of seconds to thank everyone who signed it. We then took the petition and delivered it to Canberra, where we had meetings with members of both sides of politics and gained bipartisan support, which, with the way they all bicker in Parliament, we know the two parties agreeing on anything is pretty much unheard of these days. After all that, despite numerous more requests made to the RBA, they maintained their position. It was still definitely a firm no to adding tactile features to the new banknotes. Now, this was like waving a red flag in front of a bull, albeit a blind bull, I suppose, and really made me more determined than ever to keep going until I got the answer that I was after. So the next step was to lodge a formal complaint with the Human Rights Commission, and so in November of 2014, we attended a meeting at the Human Rights Commission and spoke to representatives of the RBA of the benefits that adding tactile features to banknotes would bring. To me, it seemed like such an easy thing to do, and it was something that other countries had been doing for years. Now, one of the RBA's major arguments was that tactile features on banknotes, were they to be implemented, would not last in circulation, that they would wear out very quickly. But here's the thing. Australia developed the polymer banknote. It's actually our invention, and other countries use it, like Canada. Not only does Canada have tactile features on their banknotes, but we, Australia, taught them how to effectively implement them. Not only that, but Australia also prints accessible banknotes for Chile, Mexico, and Thailand, and so at the time, all I could think of to ask was, so who are you ripping off, us or them? Were you providing them dodgy tactile features on their banknotes or not providing us accessible currency? So another point that was raised throughout the duration of the campaign was the existence of something called a cash test card, which is a credit card shaped and sized card that you fold notes over to determine their values by their lengths. So as you might be able to see here, the way it works is you put the bottom edge of the banknote in the crease where this card folds over, and you press it up against the back like that to hopefully prevent creasing and fold it down over the front this way. And there are lines along this edge, dotted lines, and braille markings so that you can determine what the value of the card is to where it lines up to. Now, for the purpose of that demonstration, my note is taped in, but ordinarily this is quite a slow process, and the card does not allow for any creasing of the note. There's only a 7mm difference between the lengths of each banknote, which isn't much of a margin for error. So not only is it potentially unreliable, but like I said, it's quite slow, and let's face it, who wants to spend your time in a public place measuring your cash? Personally, I'd rather be counting it. So on top of all this, it can be quite a security hazard. So imagine that you're at a shopping center with your eyes closed, holding a $100 note out in front of you. Anyone could just take the note from you as you measure it, and you would not be able to identify who they are or where they went. Despite all this, unfortunately, we were not able to come to an agreement on that day. Then in February of 2015, the RBA announced that it would be adding tactile features to our new banknotes. Coincidentally enough, it was actually Friday the 13th when we and everyone else found out. So much for that being an unlucky day. All people deserve and need to be able to have the freedom of independence. Being able to access the national currency may seem quite insignificant to sighted people, but it is huge to vision-impaired people. From an early age, I knew that there were going to be things that I would need to be able to do for myself and by myself. From little things like navigating those changing environments to being able to pay for my own groceries at the shop. The only limitations that I have in my life are those limitations placed on me by others, purely and sadly out of ignorance of my capability. Of course, I may have to do things slightly differently, but it does not mean that I cannot do them. Mum instilling a strong sense of independence in me at a young age created a major building block which I have required throughout my years of education and will continue to require as I move toward a career. Together, we need to work on a world that breaks down these kinds of barriers, no matter what they are. So if you do see an injustice, don't look the other way. Don't ignore it. Stand up. Stand up and make a change, because one person really can make a significant difference to the lives of many. Thank you.